Inside the all-black locker room, there were two realities. One of a soft-spoken Tongan kid who loves family and hands out words of encouragement.
I think it really started back in 1994. I was chosen for the French series in New Zealand. It wasn't very successful. I lost my first two tests for the All Blacks.
And one that turned into a monster as soon as that black jersey was pulled over his head.
Turned around and he just says, "Guys, I'm prepared to die in the black jersey tomorrow."
On TV, they look like the same person, but defenders knew that between those white lines, Lomu was gonna bully you.
He's got the bounce. He's handed it off his opposite. Lomu. Oh.
From a traumatized kid on the violent streets of South Auckland to the first true global superstar of rugby, this is why I think Jonah Lomu must have been a psychopath. Long before the world knew the destructive alter ego, Jonah was just a kid trying to survive a brutal reality. Growing up in South Auckland, New Zealand, he was surrounded by gang culture and street violence. His childhood was not a fairy tale. It was violently unpredictable and forced a deep-seated rage inside him.
I come from humble beginnings. I didn't grow up with the sense that this is where I was destined to be. I grew up looking at that black jersey.
At just 12 years old, Jonah witnessed his own uncle brutally murdered, hacked to death with a machete by a rival gang.
Violently, in ways that you cannot comprehend. You just don't know what to do.
At home, things weren't much safer. His father was violently abusive, regularly beating Jonah with an electric cord that left severe welts and bruises all over his back.
He was quite violent when he was drunk. I guess the toughest part is that, Mum was always there to protect the kids, and Dad got angry and so forth, wanted to bash us.
He would cover up his wounds before going to school so nobody would ask questions. But by the age of 15, he finally retaliated, fighting back against the man who almost destroyed him. And inside that exterior, he was dealing with a crazy amount of raw anger. And he was growing at a mutant rate. At 11 years old, he already weighed 90 kilograms. At 14, he wore size 13 shoe and was beating up 18-year-old men in street fights.
But that was part of growing up. You won all your fights, but you're going to come home bruised. Or if not, you knew you were outnumbered, so you better have some really good running shoes on if you touch.
His mother was so terrified he might end up dead or in prison, she sent him to boarding school at Wesley College.
I sent Jonah to Wesley College because I think it's the best for his academic. In boarding school, I think it's best for him not to go on the street. That's what I wish for him.
Happy had arrived and come to see me. I live on campus, and she was concerned that Jonah's application into Wesley had not proceeded the way she'd hoped it had. And I checked with Graham Watson, and they had some concerns about Jonah's background. I had to go back and give Happy a little bit of a sad news that they were reluctant to enrol him. And Happy then said, "Please, could you see if you can get him to come?" So I went back to Graham Watson, and certainly at that stage, Graham thought we'll give him a go.
But the rage was still boiling. By the end of his second day at the new school, he'd already racked up 6 detentions. To channel his aggression, he would spend 4 separate sessions a day, all before lunch, just ruthlessly pounding a heavy bag in the school storeroom. But on the rugby field, something different was starting to show.
He is very quick indeed, and this could well be the first try of the final. Yes, it is, with Jonah Lomu, who scored a spectacular.
He practiced longer, hit harder, and played with an intensity that most teenagers don't know how to turn on. He actually started at number 8 in the forward pack, but everyone was already terrified of him.
I first noticed Jonah on the athletics field in February of his first year at school, because he was winning all his races and standout athlete during that day.
There were legendary local stories of him carrying an entire forward pack on his back for 50 metres before finally being dragged down into the mud. His own friends were scared to tackle him in practice. One minute, he'd be the shy kid laughing with the boys. The next, he was flying downhill like every tackle was a personal vendetta against the world that abused him. The humble, respectful kid off the field, and the warlord who came alive the second the mouthguard went in, was about to transform his life and the sport of rugby forever. By the time he was 18, he had the size of a lock forward and the breakaway speed of an Olympic sprinter. It simply didn't make sense. And in 1993, New Zealand Sevens legend Eric Rush saw Jonah playing a casual game of rugby and couldn't believe his eyes. The kid was handing off grown men like flies. So Rush invited him to a Sevens tournament the very next day. A star was being assembled and rising from the darkness. The national selectors caught wind of this freakish teenager destroying everything in his path, but they had a radically different idea. They didn't want him in the forwards, buried beneath the bodies in the ruck. They wanted him out wide. They wanted to give him a runway.
He came in 1994 and clearly struggled a little bit positionally.
I was a little surprised because that he went to the All Blacks so early, because remembering in the 15s game he was a number 8. In the 7s game you can play in any position for someone like Jonah, so it's easier to make that transformation into a winger at that age.
Despite having only 80 minutes of total life experience playing on the wing, Jonah was unexpectedly called up to an All Blacks trial in 1994. He was lined up opposite his childhood hero, legendary winger John Kirwan. But the switch was flipped. Shortly after, at just 19 years and 45 days old, Jonah Lomu became the youngest player to ever put on the famous black jersey, making his historic debut against France. However, the transition wasn't perfect, and Jonah was dropped after just 2 tests.
It really started back in 1994. I was chosen for the French series in New Zealand. It wasn't very successful. I lost my first 2 tests for the All Blacks, and then I was dropped in, and I didn't know where I stood.
Most scouts labelled him the same way, an athletic freak but too inexperienced to play at the highest level. But the All Blacks coaches knew you couldn't teach his physical gifts.
6'4", playing on the wing, doing sub 11 second hundreds, and then also to be that size and that nimble, stepping and scything and all the great things of a winger, and then having that massive mitt that just to palm people away.
You couldn't teach a 275-pound man to run like the wind and possess the violent intent of a wrecking ball. So they took a massive gamble and brought him to the 1995 Rugby World Cup in South Africa.
And an incredible player on a world stage, and I think everyone will remember that 1995 World Cup as a launching pad for what we now talk about as the Jonah Lomu effect.
He was on the scene, he was playing rugby at exactly the right time for Jonah Lomu.
Jonah est arrivé au moment où le rugby devenait professionnel. Il est arrivé à un moment où on a commencé à parler d'argent dans le monde du rugby.
And that is exactly when the monster was unleashed upon the globe.
New Zealand maintaining possession, wide to Lomu, he's got the bounce, he's handed it off his opposite. Lomu,
Going into the World Cup, the sport of rugby was still strictly amateur. It was a gentleman's game played by tough men, but it lacked a global, transcendent superstar.
Son côté professionnel, donc à la fois la médiatisation nécessaire.
People remember that World Cup for Nelson Mandela and Springboks winning, but from a rugby perspective, Jonah Lomu put rugby on the world map.
Jonah Lomu walked into South Africa and single-handedly dragged the sport into the professional era. Nobody outside the Southern Hemisphere truly knew who he was or what he was capable of. And by the end of the tournament, he was the most famous athlete on the entire planet. He didn't just score tries, he destroyed players on the rugby pitch. Every team tried to plan for him. But how do you stop a freight train wearing ballet shoes?
Raul asked the question is, right, how are we going to contain Jonah Lomu? And I think he asked Tony Underwood the question, and Tony Underwood said, well, You know, I'm going to get in his face. I'm going to make sure I just get in his face all day and grab hold of him, and then 2 or 3 guys can come in and stop him.
And the defining moment? The exact second the Psychopath switch was flipped for the world to see.
He just turned around and he just says, guys, I'm prepared to die in the black jersey tomorrow.
It came in the semi-final against England in Cape Town. Less than 2 minutes into the game, Jonah received a bouncing pass on the left wing. He swatted away the first defender, England captain Will Carling, like a mosquito. He easily beat the second, and suddenly, the only man standing between him and the try line was England's fullback, Mike Catt. Now, the traditional rugby move here is to use footwork. Step inside, step outside, try to evade the last line of defense. But Jonah's alter ego didn't believe in evasion. He believed in destruction. He didn't even break his stride and ran completely over Mike Catt.
But I remember him stumbling towards me, so as Carling's. And then the next thing I remember is thinking, right, he's going at that angle at 18 stone, and I'm at that angle at 13 stone. I'm thinking, yeah, there's going to be a bit of a train smash here. And so I thought to myself, right, what did my teachers teach me to go low, take his ankles out, drive through the tackle. And the next thing I remember is lying on my back and turning to the right.
He trampled him like a speed bump. He scored 4 tries in that game alone, humiliating the English defence. Carling famously said to the press after the match, he is a freak and the sooner he goes away, the better. The commentators were losing their minds in the booth. He could have put him in Ward 4, one yelled as Jonah ran through another tackle. It was a nightmare for the English, and Jonah finished the tournament with 7 tries in 6 matches. The All Blacks eventually lost the final to South Africa due to a mysterious bout of food poisoning that swept through the New Zealand squad. But Jonah Lomu had permanently changed the DNA of the sport. Rupert Murdoch and global television executives saw this giant-destroying man on live TV and instantly pumped hundreds of millions of dollars into the game.
We go, hey, you know, I helped rugby to get into the Olympic Games. There's not many people that can say that.
He is arguably the most famous rugby player in the world and made his name at the World Cup.
Rugby went professional, all because of one man, Jonah Lomu. And defences learned a new rule. You do not kick the ball to Jonah. You do not give him space. You just pray. But behind the scenes, Jonah was fighting a battle no one could see.
Me was that I didn't want my doctors telling the coaches. Because one of 2 things could happen is that the coach goes, oh, well, if he's sick, then we don't want him in the team. Because the last thing we want is him being a hindrance on the boys. And also, I wanted to make the team on my own merits. Not because of they feel sorry for me or anything like that. So, you know, I had to make sacrifices, huge sacrifices.
This is the part of the story that elevates Jonah Lomu from a mere sporting legend to a borderline mythical figure. The psychopath in him that destroyed England, the player that defences had actual nightmares about, was actually dying.
4 to 6 hours you're stuck to this machine. But, you know, I guess that's it's better than the other option, which isn't really an option. This is part and parcel of what I have to do to live.
In late 1995, at the absolute peak of his physical powers, Jonah was formally diagnosed with nephrotic syndrome. It's a rare, debilitating, and severe kidney disease. And it wasn't just a minor ailment or nagging injury. His kidneys were functioning at a fraction of their normal capacity.
You know, it sort of gives me a bit of reality again and wanting to live a bit longer. So, yeah.
The disease sapped his energy, caused massive water retention, and attacked his nervous system. Think about that for a second. The most dominant, terrifying, and a physically overwhelming force in the history of rugby wasn't even at 100%. He was exhausted, and his body was literally shutting down from the inside out. For the average human being, playing physical sports was supposed to be impossible.
Managed by Doc Mayhew, the All Black doctor, and he did a very good job of it. obviously within the boundaries of the drug laws that were in existence at the time. And of course, it affected Jonah in different ways. Sometimes he put on a lot of weight when he was on taking the steroids. Of course, that was all kept confidential and was all legal. And sometimes Jonah would get a cold and it would really knock him because he didn't have the immune system that other people had.
The doctors told him he was playing on fumes, but the man was an absolute warrior. He didn't tell the public. He didn't use it as an excuse when his form occasionally dipped or when he felt sluggish. Jonah just kept his mouth shut, strapped on his oversized boots, flipped that mental switch and went back to running through grown men. The fact that he achieved what he did while his kidneys were actively failing is arguably the greatest physical feat in the history of sports. He took time off in 1997 as the illness drastically worsened, but the beast couldn't stay away for long.
Pulled him to a slight stop, good long pass, and it's been lost by Rickelman, but England were offside.
Jonah returned. He managed his disease and refused to let it strip him of his identity.
I think his illness impacted significantly on his ability to be a 100% great player all of the time. I had to nurse him to get him to a fitness state where we could actually unleash him.
And heading into the 1999 World Cup in the UK and France, some critics questioned if Jonah was still the exact same devastating weapon.
To tell the truth, those people can write whatever they like. But at the end of the day, I'm the one that has to get up in the morning and train. They don't have to do that shit.
He answered them by being even more violent. Teams evolved. They now committed 3, sometimes 4 men just to tackle him. It didn't matter in the slightest. He scored 8 tries in that tournament, and in a brutal semi-final against France, he produced one of the most iconic runs in history.
He's still not down. He's over.
He dragged half the French forward pack on his back, shaking off tacklers as if they were toddlers. Jonah was still the irresistible force of nature, and defenders were publicly terrified. South African scrum half Joost van der Westhuizen once perfectly summarized the fear Jonah instilled in opponents by saying, "The difference between us and the other nations is that they were scared of Lomu, but we queued up to tackle him."
Through the middle, breaks one tackle. The pass going. Penalty to New Zealand.
Even the bravest men in the sport had to mentally prepare themselves for a physical car crash every single time the ball swung out to the left wing. You had to commit your entire body, and even then, there was a good chance you were ending up on a highlight reel for all the wrong reasons. Jonah Lomu was the ultimate cheat code. In fact, he literally became one.
With an awful pass, and he was nearly through. The referee didn't see anything.
The video game Jonah Lomu Rugby was released on the original PlayStation, and the developers made him virtually untackleable. If you held down the fend button, you could run the length of the pitch, swatting away pixelated defenders with ease. It wasn't just a video game mechanic, it was art imitating life. By the early 2000s, Jonah wasn't just a rugby player anymore. He was a global brand, an entity larger than the sport itself, and was offered a massive multi-million-dollar contract to play American football in the NFL, despite never playing a single down in his life.
Front pages of most of the papers around the world. He had offers coming in from anywhere, from the NFL, from Rugby League, which was creating interest in our game.
NFL scouts saw his frame and size, and drooled over putting him at tight end or running back. But Jonah turned it down. He turned down £1 million a year from Bristol Rugby because it was all about that black jersey. Off the field, the money naturally rolled in. He signed a massive global endorsement deal with Reebok, bought heavily modified cars. Jonah was living the flashy life. But even with all the fame, the massive money, and the iconic hair, he remained the soft-spoken kid from South Auckland at heart.
I'm just glad to see you, my friend. No, We couldn't leave South Africa without coming to see you.
He was known to quietly visit hospitals, checking in on sick children without any cameras around. He was a Kidney Kids New Zealand ambassador, using his own agonizing illness to inspire others, and personally replied to tweets from young cancer patients. The unique personality of Lomu was insane. On the field, he was violent. His inner psychopath had to be unleashed, but off it, he was a gentle spirit who wanted to heal your pain. But unfortunately, the human body can only take so much punishment, and Jonah was fighting a war on two fronts. He was taking massive hits from 250-pound forwards every weekend, and his own immune system was aggressively attacking his kidneys every second of the day. By 2002, the disease finally did what no defense in the world could ever do. It stopped him. His kidneys failed completely. The man who used to run 100 meters in under 11 seconds was now permanently confined to a dialysis machine for hours a day, just trying to stay alive. And in 2004, he underwent a life-saving kidney transplant. The organ was donated by a radio host friend, and while most men would sit and wait to die, the psychopath within wouldn't let him quit. The alter ego still passionately craved the contact, the roar of the crowd, and the unmatched feeling of the ball in his hands. He heroically attempted multiple comebacks in the domestic New Zealand League. He broke his leg, recovered, and tried again, but he was chasing a ghost.
What I want to leave with rugby is that it's in good state, that it's still growing, and that people enjoy it. It's a sport that people should just enjoy.
Unfortunately, his body had absolutely nothing left to give, and on November 18th, 2015, after being an ambassador to rugby for half a decade, the rugby world stopped spinning. Jonah Lomu tragically passed away in Auckland from a sudden heart attack. It was a direct complication of his brutal, decades-long battle with kidney disease. He was just 40 years old, and the news sent shockwaves across the entire globe. Even the Queen of England sent her personal condolences. His boyhood school, Wesley College, performed the haka in his honor. The abused boy who grew up desperately surviving gang violence had officially become sporting royalty. But the mark Jonah left will forever be remembered by the world. And now, his fellow countryman is getting praised by another great. Check out this video to see why, smash that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.